They say it takes a village, and believe it or not, our Neanderthal ancestors apparently understood that adage very well. New research shows that Neanderthals cared for their sick and their wounded. They engaged in community-building strategies like group hunting, food sharing, and collaborative parenting. Researchers from the University of York published a report saying that these strategies helped Neanderthals survive 40,000 years ago or so, and it was a strategy that's been passed down over the centuries to humans today. With me now is Dr. Andy Needham with the Department of Archaeology at the University of York. Sir, thanks so much for being with us. So what did these Neanderthals do? What was so special about how they were coming together as a group and the lessons that are still being implemented, still being carried on to this day, 40,000 years later?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, great question. I think the significant thing here to remember is that Europe 40,000 years ago would have been quite hostile, quite cold, and full of quite dangerous animals. So anytime you had any type of injury, whether it's small or large, this increases your likelihood of dying. So anytime we see healed trauma in the archaeological record, a broken limb that's been repaired, for example, this is of real interest. The question really is, how could that have happened? And we think with our Neanderthal ancestors here, this is because they would care for each other. So you can imagine in a modern medical setting, a broken leg is really significant. It takes weeks of care. It takes a cast, for example. How did Neanderthals thousands of years ago get around this problem? When we see that they did have things like broken legs and things as severe as that, that did heal successfully and without any evidence of any major sort of ramifications or problems. So we think that Neanderthals lived in small communities that were very tightly knit, and they hunted together. They shared parenting duties within the family and across families as well. And when it came to being injured, this especially we think is probably likely because they would have to hunt at close quarters and very dangerous animals. So things like bison, reindeer, large and quite dangerous animals that could easily injure you if you're trying to hunt them up close. So when these injuries inevitably occurred, the question really becomes then, what will you do with that injured person? And it seems that our Neanderthal ancestors did make the effort to try and care for, give food to, give water to, and otherwise help their injured colleagues.
Does this change, I guess, the traditional scientific thought about Neanderthal communities? Perhaps they hunted together, but they lived they lived alone, they lived more isolated, that there was, the old way of thinking was that they were not as communal and social beings as it turns out they were.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, I think Neanderthals have always had a bad rep, really, for over 100 years or so.
Yeah, they can't defend themselves anymore, so.
And quite, so they do need people to stand up for them. So our rereading of the evidence here, I think, is trying to achieve exactly this. Is to ask that question, quite how did this pattern that presents itself in the archaeological record get there? What's the actual ramifications of this? Our argument is that it really reveals a great deal of sensitivity in what we would usually call sort of brutish cavemen, saying that's the rep they've got. And this is actually quite significant. If you think about healthcare today, just how significant that is, we see it in most major civilizations. And yet here, 40,000 years ago, they could tend to a person with a broken leg, with an injury to the skull, who was blind and deaf in one eye, and even someone who had an amputated limb. So really significant things we'd struggle with today, they were finding ways around to help. So
even 40,000 years ago, they were finding ways to help. Dr. Needham with the University of York.